All right, now we're going to transition to our sermon on monsters. It's not an easy transition to go from moms to mothers, or monsters to moms. I mean, maybe it'd be a little bit easier if this wasn't Mother's Day, but Mother-in-Law Day. But because monsters can turn out to be your very best friend. Just like mothers-in-law. That's what I was trying to say. Y'all cut me off. Let me finish. Happy Mother's Day. He'd only been in the water just a few seconds. But in that short period of time, his brain had been able to vacillate from one worst-case scenario to the next. Just days before, when he was leaving to make this impromptu across-the-world journey, and his wife asked him, "Why are you going?" his brain was moving in quicksand. Couldn't come up with one excuse at all. And now that he's in the water, his brain has gone through every worst-case scenario. Stories of fishermen who had seen beasts larger than their vessel. Stories of fishermen who never came back to shore. And all those raced through his head. But his concern wasn't just what was below, it was the storm that was above the water too. Just that morning, when he had bought his way onto the boat that he was on just minutes before, the skies were clear, the water was calm. But now there was no way for him to stay afloat. And he knew it was going to be the end. And so when something grabbed his leg, he was almost relieved. It pulled him under, and then for some reason he was free. Trying to look up to find the shore, or trying to find the surface of the water, he was surprised to see the sun, something that he hadn't seen for hours. And as he pondered how the gray skies could have become calm, he swam to the surface, and then he felt it again, like a vacuum, just this pull, and everything went dark. And he thought to himself, of course this happens. You can't be a prophet of God and run away and think everything's going to end okay. Monsters exist for one singular purpose, it seems like, for destruction. It doesn't matter what kind of monster they are. But the way that this destruction is revealed is on different levels. And in the story of Jonah, we see multiple levels of what monsters can and will do to us. The story of Jonah is you have this prophet who's called by God to go preach the good news of God's love to the capital of the Assyrians, in Nineveh, the violent and evil oppressors of Israel. He hates them. He doesn't want to go there. So he runs away. He ends up on a boat with a bunch of unbelieving sailors who throw him overboard when the storm breaks out, swallowed by a fish, and then he ends up on dry land. And the first level of monster in the story of Jonah is pretty straightforward. It's the fish that swallowed him. The surface level monsters. These are monsters like the Philistine giant Goliath. It's the monster on the screen right there. And these are the monsters that with the mere sight of them, people get terrified. With the sound of their voice, people start to shake. But the thing about these monsters is that when you hear stories of them, there's always something that's missing. Like it's just not enough, right? Like you consume the story, but then you go, it's not all there. Best-selling author Stephen Pressfield wrote a few pieces about how to write and construct villains. And he talks about villains this way. Here's what he talks about the first level of villains. He says, the easiest villain to write is the external villain, the alien, the shark in Jaws, the Terminator, or force of nature villains, the volcano in Volcano, the oncoming ice age in The Day After Tomorrow, the Mayan prophecy, End of the World in 2012. External villains present existential threats to our physical existence. They will kill you, eat you, freeze you, boil you. The problem with external villains, though they may occasionally deliver bestseller sales, is they don't often bring out the best in the stars who must confront them. Why? Because the stars only have to duel these villains on one level, and the most superficial level at that, the physical. These are the kind of monsters that when you watch them on the silver screen, they have the same effect as the popcorn you're consuming while watching them. They're fine for what they do, but it'll never fill you up. And the story of Jonah, it's a fine story if you make it about a man who gets eaten by a fish. It's a good kid's story. Probably not one you want to tell when you're on vacation at the beach, but nevertheless, it's a good story. Someone got swallowed by a fish. But if that's the only level you listen to, you'll never really get what the author was trying to tell us. And you'll never become who God wants us to be. It's just a shallow level. But there's another level. Because in the story of Jonah, the most monstrous thing that consumed Jonah was not the fish in the sea. It was the hatred in his heart. The real monster that consumed Jonah was not something that swam below the surface. It was something that persisted in his heart. So the story of Jonah is this. He spit out on dry land, and then he finally goes to the capital of Assyria, goes to Nineveh, preaches. Everyone hears him preaching of God's love, and they repent. Even the animals put on sackcloth and ash, which is kind of like a tip of the hat saying, hey, there's something kind of funny going on here. But this is Jonah's response when everyone did exactly what he asked them to do in his preaching. Chapter 4. But this was very displeasing to Jonah, and he became angry. He prayed to the Lord and said, O Lord, is not this what I said while I was still in my own country? That is why I fled to Tarshish at the beginning, for I knew that you are a gracious God and merciful, slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love and ready to relent from punishing. He preaches, they do what he says, and he's angry. Because the real monster in the story of Jonah, the real monster that consumed him, was not the fish, it was the hatred in his heart for the Assyrians. And as the old wisdom of Westerns teach us, if you're out for revenge, you better dig 2 graves. One for them and one for you. Because revenge will always consume you too. And so Jonah spends 3 days below. When he's spit out on dry land, he is not resurrected a new person. Because the hatred is still there in his heart. And the hatred still has just as much a grip on him as it did before the fish appeared. So on the one level, you have the surface level monster that you see and you're terrified of. These will consume you. These will eat you. But there's a deeper level of monsters that's not just out there. It's not just a speech that you can give to the evil people that you know are wrong. It's not something that a gun can solve. It's like the wisdom that the Russian novelist Alexander Szynski said, that the line of good and evil is never between us and them. It's always right down the middle of our own heart. And the monster's not just out there, it's something in here. And the monsters that we all have on this level can actually turn us into the people we were created to be. Stephen Pressfield goes on to say this about this second level of villains, as he calls them. And he's talking about the movie Silver Lining Playbook, which came out a few years ago. And in this movie, which was nominated for 8 Academy Awards, including Best Actress for Jennifer Lawrence and Best Actor for Bradley Cooper, he says this. He says, the villain in Silver Lining's Playbook is interior. It exists inside Bradley Cooper's head. The villain is his obsession, fueled by his bipolar disorder, with winning back his wife, Nikki, whom he has alienated by his extravagant behavior in the past. Silver Linings Playbook made stars out of Bradley Cooper and Jennifer Lawrence. One reason: a great villain. What made that star was the scale and depth of the villain he and she had to fight. Now, whatever monster you have, it's probably not going to make you a movie star, but it can make you a saint. Thomas Merton said, "To be a saint is to be my truest self." And your monster might do that for you, because it finally gets you to the place where you need to be. It finally gets you to who you're supposed to be all along. It gets you to your heart. Now, I don't know what your monster is. Maybe it's self-doubt. Maybe it's God-doubt. Maybe it's anger at someone else, like Jonah, or maybe it's anger at yourself. Maybe it's insecurity. Maybe it's shame. But these are the very things which can turn us in on ourselves and make us just a shell of who we are created to be. But they can also be the thing that save us. Because as Leonard Cohen says, there's a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. And the light that can come in during these times can be the light that brings us to the place that Jesus has been trying to get us to access all along. Because we live out on the surface level. We see what's shallow. We worry about the fish that are under the sea or the monster that's under the bed. But Jesus says, let's move past just the behavior and let's get to what's in the heart. In the Sermon on the Mount, we see this over and over again. Jesus says, "You have heard that it is said, 'You shall not murder.' But I say unto you, if anyone has anger towards his brother or sister, he is liable to judgment." Jesus said, "You have heard it said, 'Thou shalt not commit adultery.' But I say unto you, if a man looks at a woman lustfully, he has already committed adultery in his heart." Jesus said, "You have heard it said, you should love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say unto you, you should love your enemy and pray for those who persecute you." There's surface level monsters who say, just worry about your behavior. Take care of that stuff. But Jesus invites us to go deeper than that. The problem is some of us think the monster is just the fish under the sea. And the thing about the story of Jonah is even if the fish doesn't appear, and even if the fish doesn't consume him, and even if he doesn't spend 3 days inside a fish's belly, the real monster that's consuming him is just as present. What God is trying to get us to do is to move into our heart and to deal with what resides there. The question is, what are we going to do about it? One of my favorite proverbs, which you've probably heard me say before, goes like this. There are two men in a forest on a stormy night. One man is a wise man, and the other man is a foolish man. And the way that you can tell the wise man from the foolish man is what they do when the lightning strikes. The foolish man, when the lightning strikes, he stops and looks up at the sky and goes, "Wow, lightning. It's real bright." Just stares at it. The wise man takes the brief moment of illumination from the lightning to survey the path that he's on, the direction he's going, and his footing in that moment. The wise man just stares at it, at where he is, and the foolish man just surveys the lights in the sky. There's going to be lightning. There are going to be monsters that appear. What do you do with it? I had a friend who was talking with his counselor. He was bemoaning his life's lack of realization of the dream of what he wanted his life to be at this stage. His career wasn't where he wanted it to be. His marriage wasn't what he wanted it to be. His bank account wasn't what he wanted it to be. And when he's complaining, and eventually his counselor stopped him and said, "This is your life. These are the terms. What's the invitation?" We all have monsters. They appear. The question is, what do you do with them? Do you stop and go, okay, this is where I am. This is my path. These are my terms. But down the road, there is an invitation for me that God has for me. Will I accept it? Will I see the invitation, and will I assess where I can be? Right? For Jonah, the terms were this. You have hatred in your heart. God has love in God's heart. The hatred in your heart is for the Ninevites and all of Assyria. God's heart has love for even the Assyrians. The invitation is this. Will you transform your hateful heart to look like God's loving heart? Those are the terms. Will you accept the invitation? Some of you have a life right now that the terms offered to you are not the ones you wanted. The direction of your life isn't how you drew it up. And the invitation God gives you is, will you transform your heart to receive what I have for you? And the thing is, not everyone accepts the invitation. Sometimes people see the lightning, they see the path in front of them, they go, no, I don't want anything to do with that. The monster shows up to consume and say, hey, there's something deeper going on here. And they just want to worry about the monster they can see instead of worrying about the monster in their heart. Jonah didn't accept the invitation. 3 times in chapter 4, Jonah says, I don't want anything to do with this. Let me read it to you. This is from chapter 4, starting in verse 2. He prayed to the Lord and said, O Lord, is not this what I said while I was standing still in my own country? That is why I fled to Tarshish at the beginning. For I knew that you are a gracious God and merciful, slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love and ready to relent from punishing. And now, O Lord, please take my life from me. For it is better for me to die than to live. Skip down a few verses, and again, he says it. When the sun rose, God prepared a sultry east wind, and the sun beat down on the head of Jonah, so that he was faint and asked that he might die. He said, it is better for me to die than to live. But God said to Jonah, is it right for you to be angry about the bush? And he said, yes, angry enough to die. Jonah said, I would rather be dead than to accept your invitation to let my heart be transformed to your heart. Will you accept the invitation? Because what might happen is you might find in your heart all of a sudden this invitation opens you up to what you've needed all along. That when you realize the monster isn't just out there, the issue isn't just a fish problem, it's a heart problem, you realize that your heart is trying to make space for something more that it has. And it's a gift. But as often is the case in life, we receive gifts that if they came with receipts, we would try to return them as soon as we could. Philip Yancey wrote a book entitled, What Good Is It? What Good is God? And he has a chapter in there with the peculiar title, Why I Wish I Was an Alcoholic. It's a title that doesn't make sense to me, but I have some friends who it probably makes a whole lot of sense to them. One of my friends is a nuclear physicist who grew up in a Southern Baptist church. And eventually, the way that faith was communicated to him, it seemed like it was impossible for faith and science to coincide. And so at some part, when he's finishing his doctorate, he steps away from faith. But eventually he comes back to faith for one simple reason, is that his brokenness, which was revealed to him by his alcoholism, had to be justified and rectified somehow. He had to make sense of his brokenness, and faith was the only thing that worked for him. In that chapter, Philip Yancey tells the story of someone describing the benefits of their alcoholism, and this is how the story goes. This man said, I prayed every day that God would take away my thirst for drink. And every day when I woke up, my first thought was Jack Daniel's whiskey. Then one day I realized my craving for drink was the very reason I pray every day. My weakness drives me to God. See the monster's up here, but if you realize that maybe there's something in here saying, I need more than what I have. Julian of Norwich, the English mystic, says this about sin. She says, sin is behoovely, necessary, important. Sin is behoovely because it brings us to self-knowledge, knowledge of our own fallibility, which in turn moves us to seek God. Matthew chapter 5, verse 3, Jesus says, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Eugene Peterson, in his paraphrase of that text in the Message, translates it this way: you're blessed when you're at the end of your rope. With less of you, there is more room for God and His rule. You're blessed when you're at the end of your rope. With less of you, there is more room for God and His rule. Maybe what some of us need to hear is when all you have is anxiety because you can't put your life together the way you want to, and you can't keep everything going the way it should, and you can't keep all the plates spinning, you're blessed because you realize you never were in control. When you feel desperate and empty, because nothing that you have is giving you what you need. No matter how much you try to get of it or how much you try to consume of it, it's not enough. You're blessed because then you realize that what fills you up is God. When you feel insufficient, when you feel like you don't add up, you're blessed because you realize God is the one who makes you whole. In life, you can't control a lot of stuff. You can't control the monsters you have. You can't control if you're in the sea and a whale swallows you. You can't control if 10 years ago you started to develop coping mechanisms to get through the struggles of life, which turn into an addiction, which now is all you can think about. You can't control the family of origin you were brought up in and all the dysfunction that they passed down to you. But all you can control is what you do right now. All you can control is what you have in this moment. So what I encourage you to control is, don't miss the point because you're just staring at the prop. It has never been about the whale. The story of Jonah, it's not about a whale. It's about one person's inability to deal with what's in his heart. And some of us are just as consumed as Jonah. It's not by a fish, it's not by a whale. Maybe it's by failure. Maybe it's debt. Maybe it's fear, maybe it's insecurity, maybe it's a sense of being completely out of control. But the encouragement is, don't miss the point because you're just staring at the prop. Don't just stare up at the lightning. See what this is trying to say to you. Go deeper and ask, what is God using in this to shape my heart? Right, like Mother's Day. This is a time that we celebrate moms. And for some of you, this is just a gift of a day, and you're just grateful you receive it, and it's wonderful. For some of us, Mother's Day brings up the sense like, I'm not that good of a mom. And you look around in this like blessing of social media, everyone else's home looks like it should be on Pinterest, and your home looks like it needs a lot of Clorox wipes, right? I feel like I'm not giving my kids the love that they deserve. I'm not giving them the home they need. I'm not enough. It'd be easy just to see that as what it is, but that's just a prop. The point is that God has always been the one who gives the perfect love. It's never been you. Don't miss the point because you're just staring at the prop. And the invitation for us is to don't be like Jonah. don't realize that there's something in here that's a problem. And so we'll just be distracted by what's out here. We'll run from what really needs to be dealt with because we're too afraid to deal with it. Because the good news that we all have been given is the promise of presence. 100+ times in Scripture, we're given the commandment, do not be afraid. And almost every time it's followed with the simple promise, for I am with you. When you think about dealing with what's in your heart, you do this with the confidence that God is with you.